Hi everyone, welcome to Tales of Dread. This episode takes us to Florida, but before we go to it, be sure to hit the like button, and be sure to subscribe. Now let's get on with the show. I'm telling you this because I think you're the only one who will believe me. My winter job is to shoot snakes in the Everglades in Florida. It sounds like a joke, but it's true. When summer came, I have jobs in the north, like taking people on horseback rides through the mountains. But in Florida, we catch and kill Burmese pythons, because they are the most dangerous. They are an invasive species that is destroying the ecosystem, and a female can lay more than 100 eggs a year. In fact, a female was caught with more than 120 eggs that were developing. This was a new record. This is true, by the way. We were paid by the foot of snake to keep the invaders away, and cash prizes can go as high as $2,500. So, on the day this happened, Jake and I left earlier. I drove the SUV to where we had marked the spot the day before. It was on the edge of Everglades National Park. There's nothing but marsh grass out there, and because it's so flat, you can see a long way. There are sometimes trees, but mostly it's just grass and bushes. Sometimes it gets swampy, and a river runs through it. We thought we wouldn't find much until the fog lifted because there was a lot of it that morning. We parked, and since we had some time to kill, we finished the rest of our coffee and talked a lot about our plan. We'll take turns driving the SUV, while the other person walks. If either of us sees a snake, we'll use a signal. That day, we flipped a coin, and I was going to be the first person to walk anyway. We were tired of waiting for the fog to lift, so we decided to just get started. I had a flashlight, so I grabbed that and got out of the car. I walked for a long time along that dirt road but didn't see anything. So we got back in the SUV and drove around, but we couldn't see much because the fog wasn't lifting. So, in the end, we both left. We just walked through the grass and looked down to see if there were any snakes. We finally saw a big piece of snake skin in the grass after a while. It was a huge python skin that had been shed. We walked in the direction we thought the snake had gone, and then we saw it in the grass. I mean, you can't miss that tan and dark brown python pattern in the grass. Even if you haven't seen as many snakes as we have, you can't miss it. I showed Jake our signal, which was 2 fingers in a V. And we put on our leather gloves quickly. I jumped towards the pattern moving through the grass and looked for its head. You want to grab the snake right under its head so it can't bite you, but I've been bitten plenty of times when I did that. Perfect. Jake grabbed it, and he got out the big bag to put it in. You can't just shoot them because they have to be killed in a humane way. We put them in bags and shot them right in the head. Later, when we stretched out the snake, it must have been 10 feet long. We yelled and cheered because we had finally found one. But just as we got the snake under control enough to put it in the bag, I heard a hiss. Python hisses are scary because they sound so different, but this was even scarier. This noise was loud, and it drowned out the sounds of the other birds and bugs, which is saying a lot because birds and bugs are loud in the Everglades, especially in the morning. But the worst thing about that hissing sound was that it didn't come from anywhere. From behind us, the snake came. What happened? Jake didn't yell anything. I said, "Put the snake in the bag." I hoped I was right. But before we could catch it, I heard what sounded like a person or a really big animal crashing through the grass and brush. Jake screamed and dropped the snake's end. I looked up from the snake and saw this, I don't know what it was, standing there. It was about 8 feet tall. I promise. I don't know how we missed it. It might have crawled on all fours through the grass to blend in with the darkness. When it stood up, it was black with yellow eyes and a lizard face. But it had a body like a human, or at least a human shape. It moved toward us and opened its mouth. I've never seen teeth that big and sharp. We needed the money, but we dropped the snake and ran. When we got back to the SUV, I asked Jake what we had just seen. He just kept shaking his head back and forth as if he couldn't say anything. So, I'm not sure what we saw in the end. Was it a man, a reptile, an alien, or something that was a mix of all three? There's no real way to know, but it wasn't something that most people think exists. I'm sure of it. I know this because I still hear that hiss in my sleep, and even though I don't know what it was, I remember it so clearly. I'm sure it was bad. I was able to tell that. So, since you're going to ask, yes, I have been to the Glades since then. I never did see it again, though. I think that happened to us because we were in the wrong place at the wrong time. We had just come back from a crazy weekend in Vegas with some college friends and hadn't slept much. I was on the road back to California. The drive was pretty dull, especially since we didn't leave until the last minute, and it was already night. But when it was my turn to drive, I just put the car in cruise control and let my two friends sleep, one in the front passenger seat and one in the back. At the casino, I did pretty well. So I kept myself from falling asleep on the highway in the middle of the night by thinking about how I was going to spend my winnings. I was trying to decide between a new couch and a new TV when suddenly the whole car was filled with light. My first thought was that some jerk in a hopped-up truck had come flying up behind me, but that didn't make sense. The land was so flat and had no features that it would have been impossible for me not to see another car coming. My second thought was that we were being pulled over, but that didn't make any sense either. Where could the police car have been waiting out of sight to catch people driving too fast or while drunk? I couldn't even see the road in front of me because of how bright the light was. I slowed down and finally stopped where I thought the middle of the road was. Both of my friends woke up, and one of them asked, "What's going on?" As I opened the door and got out of the car. Outside of the car, the light was even brighter. It was nearly painful. I looked everywhere like crazy, desperate to find where it came from. Was this some kind of a scam to steal money from people leaving Vegas? I heard one of the car doors open, then the second, and then one of my friends started screaming. When I turned around, his head was cocked back in a way that didn't look right. He was stuck in a light beam. It looked green, but the light around us was white, and he looked frozen. He put out his arm and pointed his index finger straight up. I went in that direction and then started to scream. It took up the whole sky. I couldn't even see the edges of it. It went as far as I could see in every direction. My mind kept refusing to accept what I knew to be true. My brain couldn't believe that I was looking at a UFO because I couldn't tell what it was made of. I could only see lights that went on and on for miles and miles. I looked at my friend John, who was standing by the passenger door. His face showed the same disbelief, shock, and fear that I felt. Eric was still stuck in the beam of light. He wasn't moving at all, but he was still screaming. John and I both put our hands over our ears as the beam of light changed and filled up with what looked like bubbles swarming around Eric's whole body. The bubbles moved on their own, but a lot of them gathered around his head, while others went around his body in circles. As we looked on in horror, we heard a new sound. It was like the sound of a grocery store scanner. High-pitched beeping that got louder every second. Every nerve in my body was telling me to run away. But where on earth could I go? At night, the desert is dangerous, and when the sun came up, I would be in danger of heat stroke, even if I had managed to get away from whatever was flying the UFO. But John had a different plan. He turned around and ran as fast as he could, which wasn't very fast because of the sand. He was about 40 feet from the road when another beam of light shot out of the UFO and held him in place. It was the same color as the one holding Eric, and it quickly filled up with the same kind of bubbles that had gone trapped. The high-pitched beeping was now twice as loud as before. I thought it would only be a matter of time before I got my own beam of light. I closed my eyes and waited for what seemed like forever. There was no more beeping. When I opened my eyes, I saw that both John and Eric were on the ground. I looked up and saw nothing but the sky. When I got to Eric, he was sitting up, and I looked over to see John struggling to get up. I helped them both up one by one and got them back to the car. Since we stopped the car, neither of them could remember anything that had happened. Even though I told them what happened, they didn't believe me. They both thought they had had too much to drink or that one of their last drinks had been tampered with. They didn't mention that both of them had been out of the car, probably because they couldn't explain that. But I know the truth about what happened. I'll never forget it, but when we were pulled over a few hours later, it was because I was driving as fast as I could to get as far away from that desert as possible. I've been listening to your show for a while, and it's great. We appreciate the work you do. I've been thinking about when to tell you about something that happened to me when I was a kid, and now seems like a good time as any. In the late 1990s, I grew up near St. Helens, Oregon, which is half an hour north of Portland. It is surrounded on all sides by forest, except where it goes down to the Columbia River, where there used to be a big logging town. I worked for my aunt and uncle during the summer between my sophomore and junior years. They owned a lot of land up in the hills, where they grew certain trees and then let a company come in and cut down acres at a time for lumber. If the roads were too overgrown, they had me go through and sort of clear out the brush in certain places to make it easier for the trucks to get through. It was probably my third week of hacking away at blackberry bushes up there by myself with a machete in temperatures over 90 degrees. It wasn't the best job I've ever had. So I got to the end of a road, where there was something like a clearing. It was very quiet, except for all the bugs buzzing around, and then I heard a big crack, like a branch falling, which is pretty normal, or at least not unusual. But then it happened again, and then again, and again. When it kept happening, I knew it wasn't just trees falling. This noise was being made on purpose by someone or something nearby. Basically, this was before cell phones were really popular, so nobody had one. So I had to decide what to do. 1. I could walk probably 3/4 of a mile or so back down the road to my truck. I could wait to see if this noise kept coming and what it was. I used to be a lot more brave than I am now, or you could say I was stupid. There's not much difference between the two, I guess. I stayed where I was standing in the clearing, holding a machete in my left hand. The branches or trees or whatever it was kept crashing, and it seemed to get louder and closer until it stopped all at once and right. Then something flew by my head, followed by another thing. I looked down and at first I thought they were rocks, but then I realized they were chunks of dirt that looked like they had been pulled out of the ground one handful at a time, and then more and bigger chunks kept coming. One was as big as a football, the next as big as a tire, and so on. I couldn't believe I hadn't been hit. I mean, I've been dodging these piles, but there were a lot of them coming at me. Then it went quiet and the chunks stopped coming, and the branches started crashing again. Suddenly, what looked like an entire tree came hurtling down the hill. I jumped off to get away from it and fell to the ground. Then there was a lot of dust in the air, and I was covered in that kind of dry, splintery wood. I looked up to see where it had all come from. And I swear to God there's a guy standing there. Well, it's Oregon, so someone living in the woods and living off the land wouldn't be as strange as it would be in some other places. But this guy is huge, maybe 12 or 15 feet tall. He's on a hill and above me, so it's hard to tell. But this wasn't just a Bigfoot, as some people might think. I wiped the dirt and wood off my face and looked up, but he was gone. Then I hear crashing, and it goes on for a while, and I think he's running away because the noise keeps getting quieter and further away. I took advantage of the quiet, knowing that at least nothing was moving. Then I ran as fast as I could back to my truck. When I got there, I turned it around and drove off faster than I should have in four-wheel drive. I never went back. I quit that job, even though my parents were upset because my aunt and uncle were mad. There was no way I was going back up there. After I told them what had happened, they got up and looked around. I think they were surprised to find what I told them, so they came up with a way to explain it. People said it was obviously a landslide, but I know it wasn't because a landslide wouldn't have happened in that area. The way the dirt was thrown at me made it seem like someone was trying to hit me. So I tried to find out if anyone else up there had a similar experience. I talked to as many long-time residents of this area as I could. When I met a man who worked at a pawn shop, he told me that he had a similar thing happen to him. He said it happened when he was hiking on the other side of the hill I was on in the 1980s. We've gotten together a few times and talked about how we remember the place looking. Even more than I did, he thought it was taller. And he said he remembered that it had a weird back that sloped down, arms that were longer than usual, and eyes that were a very dark yellow. I know for sure that there was someone there, and I also know for sure that it wasn't a Bigfoot, which is what a lot of people think of when they think of a creature in the Oregon woods. But I now think it was a mountain troll guarding its home territory. My family eventually sold that piece of land without cutting down any of the trees. I don't know who got it, but I sometimes think about going back up there to see what, if anything, they've seen.